Okay, Matt, take it away for a moment.
All right, so I'm in the process of getting your first feedback for your web project back to you. Out of curiosity, how many of you actually tested the stuff you submitted?
I think he wants you to raise your hands.
Yeah, raise your hand. Let's see. All right, all your hands are raised, which means about a quarter of you are lying. I have about 12 that just, I'm seeing, when I try to source your files, I get typos. I get one person even decided to tell in your create tables, decided to actually dictate which database, which I don't actually to write to, which I actually don't have access to because it's your personal database. So I am still determining what I want to do with that, because to actually fix all of that is going to be somewhat time consuming. Let's see, about 7 to 8 of you, I get, let's see, what's the most interesting one? Foreign key constraint fails, invalid, let's see.
Is it a drop table thing, Matt? Is it a drop table thing where the foreign key prevents the
No,
thing
as in when I actually go in to actually inspect what's causing the errors, either the foreign key, it's like a foreign key references something in another table that's not actually been declared as a primary key, which as far as I know is will not work.
That is correct.
Or referencing lots of typos. About 7 to 8 people had typos that, referencing, where they said instructors versus instructor, right? I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. I'll probably talk with Dr. Vander Zand.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, Matt, that we talk offline.
Yeah, I figure out what we want to do. I am tempted just to copy my output and put it into your comments on Canvas, and then when you fix that, I will give my full feedback, but I'm not sure yet. In any case, I hope everyone got my note on Piazza yesterday about how to do from now on. When I unzip your whatever you submit, I want to see your root directory. I think I've gotten probably 20 different unique files that I have to go in manually and copy everything out so that everything works correctly when I run my grade scripts. So yeah, we are watching.
And I give that's why I'm giving really explicit instructions in the web assignments. I really want you to do that verbatim, and that's to make Matt and Ankash's life a lot easier, because a lot of this can be graded using script grading if you follow our naming conventions exactly. And if you don't, it totally breaks everything, and Matt spends an entire afternoon trying to fix stuff, which doesn't put him in a good mood.
Do you have a question, Sam, or is you just left your hand raised?
I actually do have a question. So when it comes to WebProject2, do you have any, when it comes to like the HTML, CSS, should I say, not the PHP part, but when it comes to that, do you have any preference on how that should be submitted? So like, for example, my partner and I have it like structured, kind of like app HTML and then styles, etc. Is there a preference there?
So did I actually thought, okay, go ahead, Matt. I thought I specified something, but.
Sorry, I was going to go look on the
Okay.
website real quick. So.
Oh, so what I wanted was you to put them in separate files. So I gave you file names. Just a sec. I'm going to share my screen. Let me share my screen. Okay. So here I'm in WebProject1&2, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll notice it says login page, and then it gives you the names of the two files I want you to use. So I want basically the login.html is going to be importing login.css into it. Same thing with abet.html and abet.css.
Yeah, so sorry, I probably wasn't specific enough. What I meant was like do you want it just like all the files like right at root, like Matt was just saying, as opposed
Matt,
to like
that's for you.
or as opposed to having like a styles folder, etc.
Okay. So so this is how I'm going to phrase this. When my web driver loads your file, right, loads the HTML or the PHP file, right? You know, I can, you know, your CSS stuff is going to get loaded in your HTML file, you know, import from wherever. You can sort of put that wherever you kind of want to stash it. Okay. If you're going to put it somewhere, you know, I think the industry standard is you just have, you know, you have a file called styles, a file called JS, a file called, you know.
You mean directory, Matt?
Yes, directory. Yeah, sorry, not file. A directory called JS, a directory called styles, etc. You know, I can talk with Dr. Van der Zan, and we can, you know, if you need something, you know, explicit, we can come up with something explicit. You know, I wouldn't be opposed to that. But the PHP file should probably be at the root directory because that's where it'll be executed. It's my guess.
But basically, I kind of thought put everything at the root level because I figured for Matt, it's easiest to just VI or look at everything from one directory rather than having to navigate through a maze of directories. I know that's not industry standard, but I'd rather make life easier for Matt.
Yeah, that makes sense. That answers my question. Thank you.
Matt, do you want the, I can add something to the assignment that indicates the name of the directory they should put everything in.
Sure, that's fine. You can, you know, I was good, you know, that's one thing I was thought about is instead of having everything in root, everything comes under, you know, web project or something, or abet project or whatever.
Okay. Shoot me an email after this, and just well, we're going to discuss this and we're going to touch base anyhow, so okay. I'll just get you to give me a directory name.
Sure. All right, I think that.
Other questions for Matt?
Bianchi, I think. Yeah.
Or Andy, go ahead. You can just, if you speak, you unmute yourself.
Yeah.
How do you want us to demo the graduate project?
Okay. The grad project, if you submit, it's okay. So I'm going to lean towards, I'm not going to force you to demo it. All right. That is under the condition that your report that you turn in with it is sufficiently detailed. Okay. If I have questions or like, you know, I read through it, like I have, you know, what is all this doing? I will email you and we'll set up a time on Zoom where you can demo it. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Do you want us, like, in the write-up, it says you don't really want the code we use to populate the data. Would that be easier since, like, to do as well, since we can't really demo it, like, to you easily? Just to throw that in there and just so you could look at it if you wanted to.
Wait, hold on. I think you're going to have to give Matt your sample data. Matt can't. Everyone's going to have a different database on this one. This is the grad database, so everyone's going to have different stuff. So you're going to have to give them sample data.
Okay, I was just confused because on the write-up it says, "I do not want to see the code you use to populate your relations with concrete data." And I was just kind of confused about that.
Whoa, just a sec. Let me take a look. Wait, what? Just a sec.
I see it. Sections, item C under 3.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Let the blah, blah, blah. Okay. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a mistake. Yeah, I do want to see that code because otherwise Matt's not going to be able to run any queries.
When you do that, I think only 2 people turned it in so far.
Okay.
Which I can reach out to them directly. Put everything that you use to populate your database and literally called populate.sql. And I'll source that when I run your stuff.
Yeah.
Hello?
Thank you.
I have a question.
Who's talking?
It's
Bianchi.
Matthew Bianchi. Yep,
Yeah.
Matt Bianchi.
Okay.
Okay, so this has to do with just submitting. So working in groups is something you permitted, but I'm a little bit confused about, do we both need to submit the actual files each ourselves, or do we need to have one person and like that's designated to submit? I was a little confused about that.
So only one person will need to submit. The other person in your group in that assignment, if you just go and put a comment on that assignment and says, my partner is X, right? When I download the submissions, that comment turns into just a little text file that says my partner was this person, and I can do that to create pairs.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Hunter, you had a question too about, you had a chat question where you asked if the report should be some sort of guide. It doesn't really have to be. I mean, the DDL and the sample data and the queries and the ER diagram essentially speak for themselves. So I basically was trying to force you to lay it out in a way that actually, if you just did it the way I suggest it, then Matt would be able to follow it. So just like, I'm going to share my screen again. So up here I have what you should submit. Basically, if you submit this ER diagram and an English language description about the tables you use with this stuff and the source file and the queries file, it should be good enough for Matt to figure out. So does that answer that question, Hunter?
Yep, seems like it does. All
Okay,
right.
perfect.
Yeah. So I mean, just I need the stuff should just be a description of what you're trying to accomplish. Not it doesn't need to be a 8-page conference paper. It just needs to be this is what I designed. This is how they relate to one another. Then everything should be good. Anything else? All right, I don't see any more hands, so.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks, Matt.
No problem.
Okay. So I'm going to take it from here. And actually today I am going to be going over some of the essentially solutions to the web project, since the late deadline for it is already passed. And even if you correct your typos, you better not change your queries, because Matt has your original documents. The lecture for today, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let you watch the pre-recorded lecture. So if you go to today's lecture, it's actually an important lecture on MySQL and regular expressions. And the reason it's important is because for your second project assignment, you're supposed to use MySQL with PHP, and you're supposed to use prepared statements. And the video lecture is good. It explains why you use prepared statements. There was a Piazza post about a nasty string I gave you that had a lot of single apostrophes and double quotes in it, and HTML tags, and basically prepared statements ensures that none of that will mess things up, that a string can contain all those nasty kinds of special characters, and you can still get the string inserted into the database without any problem. And then regular expressions, they're going to be really handy for type checking, because you typically have to type check both on the client side and the server side. The reason is that hackers are able to essentially submit form data that is incorrect. They can bypass the web interface. Even with post method, a good hacker can figure out how to bypass the web interface. So the type checking you do on the client side is essentially only to give the client faster feedback and to take some of the load off the server, but you have to repeat the type checking on the server side, and regular expressions give you a really nice, easy way to do that type checking. So the lecture, that lecture is right here. If you click on the link, you can see it's about an hour, 15 minutes. It's very good in my opinion. You should be able to speed it up to about 1.5 times speed, so it'll go faster. But it's a beefy lecture. Then make sure you do the quiz also for today. Don't forget about that. What I wanted to go over was the solutions for the ER diagram, and also wanted to go over the primary keys for each of the relations. And I wanted to take a look at the first couple queries, which a bunch of you kind of did not get right. So what I'm going to do is start with the ER diagram. This is the one I came up with, and it's not necessary that you exactly came up with mine. I'm going to talk about a couple of variations. But essentially, there's two main relationships, and one of them is instructors teach courses. The other is either sections or courses assess outcomes. If you're wondering about how you might have gotten these two relate. By the way, I made sections be a entity. You could have made it be a relationship. You could have made it be a relationship from instructors to courses. So you could have said instructors teach courses and sections was the relationship that represented. That was fine. I decided that sections is really a weak entity for a course, much like in the third homework assignment, you did something with a video store. and you had a catalog of videos, and then you had physical copies of the videos. And in my solution, the copy was an entity and the catalog description was an entity. So I did the same thing here. I made the course, which is like a catalog description, the entity, and the section is kind of more like the actual concrete implementation of it. So I made it a concrete entity. And then the other one, like I said, is sections assess outcomes. Then the best way to handle outcome results and assessments and narratives is they're really compound attributes, which I'll get to in a moment. Performance levels is really an attribute associated with outcome results. And that takes care of the relations. So basically, instructors, courses, sections, and outcomes are the four relations that map to entities. Then you have a course outcome mapping relation, which is the assess relationship. Then you have outcome results, assessments, narratives, and performance levels. Four relations, they're essentially attributes. So if you go and look at the web project, which I will do next. Back here, sorry. Actually, I'm going to do two, just a second. I need to do something. Okay, so the project description gave you nine relations. So that's what you had to deal with, these 9 relations in your ER diagram. So instructors, courses, sections, outcomes. These are my 4 entities. Then outcome results, assessments, narratives, performance levels, attributes, course outcome mapping, a relation between course and outcome ID. So your question may be, okay, how could I have figured out that these were relationships? So there's a couple ways. First, you could have gone back to the project overview, and in the project overview, one of the sentences said the interface should allow the faculty member to select their courses. So this strongly indicates some kind of relationship between faculty member and courses. And it should spring to mind that's probably a teacher's relationship. And then the next sentence says the interface should display the student outcomes assessed in the course. So that should get you some inkling that perhaps there's a relationship between outcomes and courses, especially because outcomes and courses are 2 of the relations. So when we went over ER diagrams, I said if there's a sentence with a couple entities and a verb, there's a good chance there's a relationship between them. And then it said, and allows the faculty member to enter for each outcome. So this is where it gets a little dicier. And I was more than happy, actually, and I told Matt this, to allow you to treat assessments, outcome results, and narratives as being 3 different relationships from a course to an outcome. So a course provides outcome results for an outcome, a course devises an assessment plan for an outcome, and a course provides a narrative for an outcome. Happy if you treated outcome results, assessments, and narrative as relationships. That was fine. No problem with that. Okay, in fact, when I first was thinking about the ER diagram, that's what I thought was the way to handle it as relationships. But then as I thought about it, I realized that in fact, each of these three items that you see here is actually kind of a compound attribute. Remember, a compound attribute is an attribute composed of sub-attributes. And that they were really attributes of the course assesses outcomes. So essentially for each outcome, a course is providing information about the number of students exceeding, meeting, or not meeting expectations. So this is like an outcome result. It's a compound attribute consisting of three attributes: exceeds, meets, and not meets expectations. Same thing, is each outcome has an assessment plan. So it's like each outcome has several assessments, and each assessment has a description of the assessment and a weight. So it's like, what I'd like to be able to do is say that I have an assessment plan, and it'd be nice if I could just have assessment 1, weight 1, assessment 2, weight 2, but I can't, okay? Because you have to have in one tuple. I might like to be able to do this, but I can't because I have to have a fixed number of columns, and every outcome has a varying number of assessment plans. So instead, what I had to do was it's a multi-valued attribute. So instead, I created an assessments relation, which essentially had the section ID that was assessing the outcome, and I had the outcome ID and the major, and then I had what was being the assessment and the weight. And that way I could repeat for each section an assessment as many times as I wanted. So really, assessments was a multi-valued attribute, and it was an attribute of the assesses relationship. And then the same thing holds for the narrative listing. It's really a compound attribute that the course is providing a narrative summary of the outcome, or is explaining the outcome. So it's as though it's an attribute, like you might call it evaluation attribute, which consists of three attributes, namely strength, weaknesses, and suggested actions. So that is why in my ER diagram, I have outcome results, assessments, and narratives as attributes of assess. Okay, and each of them is a compound attributes, and I showed assessments as being one-to-many because there was one-to-many assessments for any outcome. You needed at least one assessment per outcome. Now, performance levels, if you have a description for them, like meets expectations, not meets expectations, so on and so forth. So for an outcome result, you actually could probably have simply said you have a result or an outcome result, and you could have tried to label the columns as things like exceeds expectations, and not meets expectations. And meets expectations. Okay, they're in the wrong order. Meets expectations should have been in the middle. So this would have been the schema. And those would have been the column names. However, when we designed it, we were looking for something more general where it could be used by other departments in the engineering college or even eventually at other universities, and they might have a different number of outcome levels. So instead of having a fixed number of outcomes, we decided there could be a variable number of outcomes. Now you can no longer, with a variable number of outcomes, you can't put the results in a single relation anymore. It becomes a multi-valued attribute. So you have to pull the same trick that I pulled with assessments. You now have to have an outcome result, and it has to be labeled with the attribute name, like meets expectations, and then the number of students. But the problem with that is this is a huge string. Okay, and it takes up a lot of storage. Okay, you don't want to have to kill lots of storage every time you list this attribute. It'd be much better if it were an enumerated type, because enumerated types get translated into integers by MySQL. So if you had an enumerated type, like say not meets expectations, say meets expectations, and not meets expectations, and you could instead have an outcome result that looks like this. Whoops, it was meet expectations. That's a lot less room in the database. And in fact, it's not even stored as ME in the database. In the database, these are probably mapped to 0, 1, 2. In the database, it's probably, instead of stored as ME1, as ME30, it's probably stored as 130 in the database. So in order to make that happen, we have to effectively map these constants to descriptions, which is why I had to have a performance levels relation with two things, an enumerated type, which was the performance level, and then a performance description. Okay, so it turned out that performance levels is simply a mapping of a long string performance description to a enumerated constant that I can use in outcome results. It's the only place that is actually used. Hence, in my ER diagram, we say I had outcome results and performance levels. So I did it like that. Now, the other way you could have gotten to this, or it might have helped you figure out what your relationships were, was looking at foreign keys. So instructors, courses, and outcomes, those three relations didn't have foreign keys, so they're looking a lot like entities. Now, performance level also doesn't have a foreign key, and you might very well have thought it was an entity. That's where it takes a little more thought to realize it's not an entity, it's an attribute. If you look at section, you see course ID and instructor ID, which should really lead you to a feeling that it might be a relationship. And that's why I said in the ER diagram that if you had indicate it. If you did not have sections, let me get a color. That's what I want. Okay. So if I don't have this, if instead I just have courses teach, I'm sorry, not that, I meant the other way. So instructors teach courses, and you said that that was the sections relationship. I was fine with that. And then you had courses assess outcomes, and you didn't have sections here. I was fine with that. And then you made your relationship be like that. I was down with that. That was fine. Okay? So the point is that, when you saw section and you saw the fact that it had a couple foreign keys in it, should have sent off some kind of bells and whistles that you're looking at a relationship. Okay, then anytime you see mapping, that should definitely ring a bell that you're looking at some kind of relationship. Mapping is the living one way we talk about functions in computer science. And when I described relationships, they're essentially functions. And this gives you the two foreign keys essentially give away what the relationship should be. So essentially, that confirms what you saw up here, that outcomes are assessed in a course. Okay? So this looks like there's a relationship. Now, in fact, I made it sections assess in my ER diagram. I had it as sections assessing outcomes. And the reason I did that was if you look at all the attributes, like outcome results, assessments, they all have outcome ID, major, and a section ID. So all of them look like they are a relationship between a section and an outcome. Okay, here it looks like it's a relationship between a section and an outcome. Here between a section and an outcome. So that's why I had the relationship as being section assesses ID, but it's equally fine to say that the course assesses the ID. And the fact that in each of the outcome results, assessments, and narratives, you have foreign keys for outcome ID, section ID, is why I was fine if you said that narratives was a relationship between section and outcome, and so was assessments and outcome results. Okay, so questions about the ER diagram. I know that's a lot. By the way, I did not ask for multiplicities originally, so I did not require them. Before I take questions, I told Matt to give extra credit if you get them right. I think 3 points for extra credit if you get 4 out of 5. But basically, the idea is sections can assess one or more outcomes. Outcomes can be assessed by one or more sections. With the teach relationship, a instructor can teach 0 or more sections of a course. So if you have an instructor and a course, an instructor can teach 0 or more sections of the course, but a section of a course, if you have a course and a section of a course is taught by exactly one instructor, and a section is identified with exactly one course. So a section is identified with exactly one course, and it actually doesn't really matter about instructor here. It's just that a section is associated with exactly one course, hence 1-to-1. So that's how I came up with the multiplicities. So questions about any of this? Hopefully everyone is still with me at this point. Okay. Yes. Take it away. Jay Dunkley, question?
Yeah, so for the multi-valued attributes, can you explain why they appear off of the relationship rather than the actual entities themselves? Because looking at your notes, I guess seeing this now, it wasn't made very clear to me why that is specifically. Because I had in ours, for my ER diagram, they were coming as attributes off of the entities themselves.
Okay, so you probably had them as attributes of what?
Sections and outcomes.
Of both? Because you can't. You can't make them attributes of both. That would create an update anomaly.
Okay.
Okay? You can't, they're descriptive attributes. Like the number of students that meets expectations is not a foreign key. It's a descriptive attribute. So you can't associate it with both an outcome and a section.
Okay.
You'd have to associate it with one or the other. If you're trying to associate it with both, that should have been a tip-off that it was the relationship between the two.
Okay, so whenever they're descriptive, you can write them as, I guess, because I don't remember seeing an example in the notes about it coming off a relationship like that. So whenever it's descriptive, they can become
Part of the relationship. Here, let me show you where it was in the notes, okay? Because actually, it was in the notes. So, go back to the ER diagrams. And it was slide 29. So here was newspaper advertises a property for rent. And it was a many relationship between a newspaper and a property. So you were showing the attributes date advertised, date of the advertisement, and the cost of the ad were attributes of the relationship.
Okay, thank you. For some reason I thought that was just another entity coming off of it.
Yep. No worries. That's why I'm going over it. Believe me, I know this wasn't easy. Also, for your information, the ER diagram is only 22 of the 78 of the 100 points. I made the easier stuff worth most of the bulk of this grade. So,
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay. That case, I am going to move on to the flow of the interface because you're going to kind of need that at some point to understand what's going on. And also in the queries, I think some of you, just looking at how you did the queries, it looked like you weren't sure what was going on with the flow. So coming back to the interaction with the website, you start at the front page of the website. So you authenticate the user with a username and a password. So initially, when the user logs in, what I'm going to show you now is the workflow. So the user tries to log in. So there is the login page. which you're kind of doing right now in WebProject 2 with login.html. So the user logs in, and that sends a email and a password to the server. Now, the server is going to send back to the interface a list of the courses or list of sections / majors taught by that instructor. Okay, and the reason we need that is if you look at the original interface, when I log in, I give it over here in sections. The first thing I have to do is select section, and it tells me which sections I can choose from. Now, in your web interface, it may also have the major. It will have the major. So it'd be like COSC 365 Fall 2019 CS or CS 365 Spring 2019 CPE. And the reason for that is a course might be assessing two different majors, like CS 365 might have to assess both computer engineering and computer science majors. So you need two different menu items there, one for CS 365 Spring 2019 CS, one for CS 365 Spring 2019 CPE. So what you are getting back right here with the list of sections and majors taught by that instructor is something that goes into this menu right here. So now the user selects a menu item, and let's say I select CS 365. So the user selects a menu item. Okay, so now they're on the kind of on the results / selection page. So one thing they can do is select a section. And now this is going to get a little too complicated if I show it here. So I'm going to go and extend the page. And when you select a section, then it passes the section ID back to the interface, to the server. And the server in session variables already knows what the instructor ID is because they got that when you logged in. So they already know what the instructor ID is, and they're getting a section ID. And what needs to be served back is any outcome results assessments. So what gets served back is any existing outcome results. Actually, I'm sorry, that's not what gets served back yet. What gets served back is the outcomes assessed by that section. Okay, so once you have that, now I'm going to have to go to a different screenshot. going to go to WebProject2. Now you're going to see something that looks like this. So CS465 assesses outcomes 2, 3, 5, and 6. So now you can populate this navigation bar right here with the outcomes, and each of them is supposed to be a menu item. So now the instructor selects an outcome. In this case, I've selected outcome 2. And so you can see that what gets served back is a description of the outcome and any outcome results we already have, any assessment plans we already have. In this case, there's 4 of them. And any narrative summary. In this case, they haven't entered anything yet for them. So when the user, next what happens, another thing they can do is they can select an outcome to assess. Okay, when they do that, I'm going to go to a different page now. So when they select okay, what goes to the server is an outcome ID. And what comes back from the server is any existing outcome results and any existing assessments and any existing narratives for that outcome. And an outcome description. So those 4 items get served back. Okay, now the last thing that can happen, and I know this diagram is getting a little bit, is that they do something, enter as outcome, result, assessment, or narrative. And I know that's, again, a little crowded. So we come over here, and so the user will do one of them because it's the same for the other 3. So the user enters an outcome result or outcome results. So the results are shipped to the server as name value pairs. So it'd be like meets expectations in some number, exceeds expectations in some number, and not meets expectations in some number. So they come over here in name value pairs, and the server is going to update the database with a tuple to outcome results. Okay, and if it was assessments or narrative summary, it would do likewise and indicates success or failure. Generally, it will be success. There really shouldn't be any good reason for a failure unless a hacker's trying to spoof you and gives you an invalid thing, like an invalid outcome ID. And that's essentially it. That's the workflow that you are working with. That's the sum total of the user interactions with your web page. Actually, that's not quite true. There's one other one that I will get, actually, yes, there's one other possibility. And that was, coming back here. Sorry. Sorry, there's stuff all over my screen. Okay, they go to the upper right-hand corner with this user body. They select the password, and what's going to pop up it's not until we get to Web Project 3, so you're not even worried about it. But what's going to pop up, and you're going to do in Web Project 3, so you don't have to quite worry about it yet, is a password page. And there you're going to be able to enter a new password. But that's not part of Web Project 2, so we're not going to worry about it yet. Okay, so for Web Project 2, you're not worried about the interaction with that password page. You do have to put that menu item in the upper right-hand corner, but that's it. So if you look at the screenshot for Web Project 2, you see the little body up there with the little down arrow caret. So any questions about the workflow? That's okay. So now let me map that workflow to what you're doing in this lab. So first of all, you're simply mocking up the interface for the login page and the data collection page. And you're doing that with some HTML elements that you can reuse in the final web project. And you're using some CSS to do the styling, and you're making it approximately match my styling. And I'm not letting you use a web toolkit because I want you to be familiar with the basic CSS and the basic HTML so that you can tweak it if you need to. Because there's a lot of times where you have to deal with an editor that doesn't allow you to work with an IDE. For example, when I make up an assignment in Canvas, Canvas gives me an HTML editor, but it's very weak. And I end up having to enter all the styling commands and all the HTML elements by hand. It doesn't have a rich integrated development environment that allows me to do the styling. So I want you to learn how to do it at the very basic level rather than using a toolkit like Bootstrap or Angular that would hide all the details from you. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part is implementing this workflow I was talking about. And you are printing the output in JSON format because that is the format that will be going back to the client. So every time you see success failure or you see all this stuff coming back from the section, from the server to the user, it's coming back as JSON. Okay, so it's coming back in JSON format. Hence, I'm making you do JSON output right now from PHP. Okay, so login.php, that's the query, the first query that you wrote. And if you look, what that query does, it takes the email and the password, it validates, first of all, it validates the user. And secondly, if it's valid, it returns a list of sections and majors taught by that instructor. So you were expected to write a query that returns the section, course, major, semester, and year of all sections taught by that instructor, because for that menu I showed you, you need the section ID. I'm sorry, you don't need the section ID. You need the course ID, major, semester, and year in order to create that menu item. If you look at the menu item, see, the menu item is a course ID, a semester, and a year, and in addition, you're going to need a major. So that's why you need these 4 pieces of information. Then you're going to be also returning the section ID, because remember, when you select a menu item, what's going to happen is the section ID is going to be sent. So when you select a section, the section ID is sent to the server. So you also have to send the section ID over. And it turns out you don't need the instructor ID because you're going to keep that on the server side. But that's going to help us verify that you've got the right instructor. Okay, now, how do you write that query? So you need, given the instructor ID, you want to find all sections that that instructor teaches. Okay, so that should be easy enough. If you go to the database, you see that there's a sections relation. With the instructor ID, you can find all the sections that the instructor teaches. So that gives you the instructions, all the sections and the semester and the year. What it doesn't give you is the major. So the question is, how do you find out which majors are being assessed in that section? And this is where a lot of you went wrong. So a lot of you said, okay, where do I find the major that's assessed by this section? And you went and you say, oh, outcome results. It has a section ID and it has a major. And so that's what you put in your query. You joined the instructors with sections and sections with outcome results. But here's the problem. Look at the workflow. You are being asked, you're given an email and a password, and you're giving back the list of sections, majors taught by that instructor. And not until the instructor actually enters this information does outcome results get updated with that tuple. The first time the instructor logs in, there's no tuples for that section. So you can't actually use outcome results, because if there's no tuple for that section because the instructor has not yet entered data for the section, that information is not present in outcome results. what you had to do was continue down the list of relations to course outcome mapping. Okay, and you're thinking, well, it doesn't have a section ID. All it tells me is what course assesses which outcome and which major in which semester. But a section has a course ID associated with it. So in fact, you can natural join a section with a course outcome mapping on course ID, and that's going to give you the list of outcomes and which major it's assessing for that outcome. So in fact, for query 1, what you needed to be doing was a three-way join. So query 1 actually needed to be a three-way join among instructors, sections, and course outcome mapping. Okay, I'm not going to give away the query completely because I want you to redo it if you didn't get it. I'm happy to talk to you about it privately via Piazza if you're having trouble correcting your query. But the query had to be a three-way join between these three relations, and it will give you the right outcome. Okay, I'm going to do query 2, and then I'm going to take questions because this is what gave most of you problems. So query 2 is outcomes.php. I'm asking you to print the outcome IDs and outcome descriptions of all outcomes associated with a section ID and a given major. So if we go back to our workflow, you see that a user selects an outcome, I'm sorry, going back, a user selects a section, So right here, selects a section, and what gets sent to the server is actually a section ID and a major. Okay, these two pieces of information are going to be, when they select the menu item, you're going to send that information back to the server. The section ID uniquely identifies the semester and year, so you don't have to pass that back, but it doesn't uniquely identify the major. So you come back, and that's why I'm having you, given the section ID and the major, you have to return to the interface all of the outcome descriptions and outcome IDs so that they can create these links right here. These four, in this case, these 4 links for the outcomes being assessed by CS465, for, in this case, CS majors. So again, the question is, where do you come up with the outcomes that are going to be assessed by that section? And again, many of you tried to go to outcome results for the same reason that it seemed like outcome results over here, it looked like outcome results had the section ID, the outcome ID, and the major. But the problem is, again, if the instructor has never entered that information doesn't exist in outcome results. Again, where you have to find the information is down here in course outcome mapping. Given the section ID, given the section section ID, you can find the course that it is assessing. Given the course that it is assessing and the major, which was also passed back, you can find the outcome ID, or actually all the outcome IDs being assessed for that major. And then, given the outcome ID and the major, you can come up here to outcomes and you can get the outcome description. So for query 2, which is outcomes.php, so query 2 is outcomes.php. It's a three-way join involving sections, course outcomes mapping, and outcomes. Again, redo that query for the second web project if you didn't get it for the first one. I think you can do the rest of the PHP queries, and I think you should also be able to map all of the remaining PHP queries, 3 down through 11, actually 3 through 10, to things that you might have to do in the interface, given the workflow that I just showed you. So, any questions about these first 2 queries? We're all good? Okay. I am going to upload this recording to the website, so it will be available in later today, just like you have the lecture for today. So just like you have the lecture for today, probably over here, I'm going to have the description of the web project. So I'll probably label it something like WebProject2 explanation, something like that. And it'll be available right here later today, so you can review the lecture. So with that, I am going to let you all go, and I will see you Thursday, where we are going to be talking about an introduction to JavaScript. So we're going to go to the client side starting Tuesday, and this wraps up how we deal with the server side. So see you all Thursday. Keep well, keep safe, and good luck with everything. And I'm here for a few minutes to answer questions. Then I need to go grab lunch. I'll be back at 3:30 for office hours for an hour. So feel free to take off.
I have one quick question.